Chapter 10. Emily Musters Her Wits. At church next day, Dr. MacDonald said something that helped her. Emily's mind kept drifting away from the sermon to last night's fun, but suddenly this sentence flashed out. It was a quotation from Shakespeare, she thought. "Muster your wits, stand in your own defense." She had no idea in what sense he had used it, but it seemed to be a message aimed directly at her. "Muster your wits, stand in your own defense," she kept repeating to herself on the long walk home. After dinner she sat down in her rocker, looked out at the snow, and proceeded to muster her wits. "I'm going to fill my winter, and I'm going to fill it with something worth while," she resolved. "I'm not going to neglect Grandpa either." One thing she could do, beside housekeeping and cooking, she could practice the piano. She enjoyed playing, and it would be a satisfaction to try and master the instrument. "I'll start taking lessons again," she planned. "Another thing I can do, of course, is read. Not the way I've been doing, but to some purpose." She knit her brows. "I'll read Scott to Grandpa, but perhaps there's something else he'd enjoy that I'd enjoy, too. Something we could study together." She smiled broadly. "Abraham Lincoln. Grandpa would like anything about Lincoln, and I've never read a good biography of him. I'll ask Miss Fowler which one would be best." And then an idea swept across her mind like a wind sweeping away gray clouds to show a sky of sparkling promise. "I wonder whether I could get a group together to study something under Miss Fowler. We could study Browning." She still hadn't got past the ballads. In fact, she seldom opened the little brown and gold book, but it was more precious than anything she owned. "Except my mother's locket, maybe," she thought. She knew that she wanted Browning for Don's sake, but there could be nothing wrong in seeking the same pleasures he was enjoying. "The first thing to do is ask Miss Fowler whether she would take such a group. If she will, then I'll go to Alice Morrison." She remembered what Alice had said about getting together. "Perhaps she'd like to join, and would help me find others." She jumped to her feet. "I'll go and ask Miss Fowler right now, and while I'm about it, I'll go to Miss Cobb's, too." She went to Miss Cobb's first. She was more than a little in awe of Miss Fowler, who, although so small and cordial, had a definitely regal air. Miss Cobb was an old friend. She was a large, gentle woman with blue eyes and white skin and reddish gold hair, now growing gray. She must have been really beautiful when she was young, Emily thought as they sat talking in the warm little parlor which held two pianos, a grand and an upright, for 4 piano arrangements at recitals. She thought of Miss Cobb's story. She had known it all her life, but it had never seemed real until this afternoon. It struck her poignantly now that Miss Cobb had been just a little older than she was when she broke her engagement to Mary because her sister had died of tuberculosis, leaving 4 children. Miss Cobb had started teaching the piano and had made a home for them. But the first 3 had died of their mother's disease, one by one, when they came to adolescence. Only Bobby remained, the champion wrestler of the 5th grade, making a snowman now on the front lawn. What struggle and suffering and sacrifice Miss Cobb had known, Emily thought, and yet she was always cheerful. She was smiling now with real affection. "I'm so glad you have time for your music again. I remember how well you played Paderewski's Minuet." "I was studying that when I stopped my lessons," Emily replied. "Well, We'll begin with it. When would you like to start? After Thanksgiving, Emily answered. The return of the crowd seemed such an epical event that she couldn't get her mind on music until it was over. Miss Fowler lived in a small apartment in a big private house on Broad Street. The little Bostonian answered Emily's ring herself. I was just going to make myself some tea. Now you can join me, she said, taking Emily's furs and coat. When Miss Fowler went to the kitchen, Emily looked around the living room with pleasure. There were oriental rugs on the polished floor. The walls were lined with bookcases, and the table bore a new Atlantic Monthly, an Outlook, a theater magazine, and several books still in their paper jackets. Emily picked one up, How to Live on 24 Hours a Day by Arnold Bennett. Over the mantel, beneath which a fire was crackling, hung a brown sepia picture of the Church of Notre Dame in Paris. On another wall was a pinkish-colored picture of St. Mark's Square in Venice. Emily recognized copies of A Greuze Girl, Whistler's Mother, Raphael's Madonna of the Chair. Maybe Miss Fowler has been abroad. Maybe she's seen the originals of some of these pictures, Emily thought. The tea tray held a fat silver pot, a silver cream pitcher, and sugar bowl with tongs, a plate of sliced lemon, and 2 flowered cups. I love to talk over tea, Miss Fowler said. She looked at Emily closely with her black, very penetrating eyes, and Emily felt sure Miss Fowler knew that she had come with some project in mind. Emily asked the question about Lincoln first. Herndon is still the best, Miss Fowler answered promptly. The true story of a great life. It's a collaboration with Week. She put down her cup. You discovered, I see, that we have to build our lives out of what materials we have. It's as though we were given a heap of blocks and told to build a house. She paused and smiled. You and your grandfather will have a wonderful time with Lincoln. This made it easy for Emily to suggest the Browning Club. I'd love it, Miss Fowler responded. Her dark eyes gleamed. Would you have time to take us? Of course. I'd never refuse one evening a week to Browning. I thought I'd ask Alice Morrison. She'd be interested, I think, and there are several girls from her class in town. They planned eagerly. Do you own a copy of Browning? Yes, I do. I'd like to use Richard Burton's edition in the Bell's Letters series. That's the very one I have. Well, get yourself a notebook and some pencils then, Miss Fowler said gaily. We'll meet here Tuesday evenings. When would you like to begin? Right after Thanksgiving, Emily replied. She rose, warmed not only by the tea but by the prospect of buying a notebook for study. She stopped at a drugstore and called Alice Morrison, who fell at once with the idea. I know several girls who would like to join. I think we ought to make Miss Fowler accept a fee, said Emily. Oh, of course. I'll call you again and we'll work it all out. The next day, walking on air, she went to the library for the book on Lincoln, and to Cook's bookstore for 2 small, fat notebooks. She bought a box of pencils and a pencil sharpener. It was like getting ready for the first day of school. It's amazing, she thought, what you can do when you muster your wits. A few days later she went to the Lion department store and bought a new dress. It was quite unnecessary to bother Aunt Sophie with Miss Mix. There were very nice ready-made dresses. Emily found a rose-colored wool trimmed with brown velvet, buttoned up one side with a long row of brown velvet buttons. Side fastenings and up and down rows of buttons were the newest thing. That night She brought the jewel box down to the fire and laid out the old-fashioned earrings, the bracelets, the gold chains, the lockets and brooches. She had realized on the night of the party that these gracious old things were becoming to her. She tried on pearl earrings and looked at herself in the mirror. She wished Cab would invite her to another party. Her old moody self tried to say that she had been a failure, but she knew better. He's been up to the Wisconsin game. Besides, Cab Edwards changes around. I wish I could improve my dancing, though. Just possibly he might have asked her sooner if she had danced better. There was a dancing school in town, but the classes were only for children. At first thought she felt foolish going for private lessons, but she laughed herself down. Pooh, it's nobody's business but my own. I'm studying everything else. I might as well study dancing, too. And she walked down Front Street to Mrs. Anderson's Select Dancing Academy. Mrs. Anderson was a large woman with a hard, tired face. She was lame. How had a lame woman undertaken to teach dancing, Emily wondered. Probably the training in dancing had come first, and Mrs. Anderson had not been deterred from her chosen career, although it must be difficult and tiring to lead children as she was doing now through so endlessly many steps. Everybody's doing it, doing it, doing it, everybody's doing it. The pianist, whose red hair was pomped all over like a halo, thumped out the same tune over and over again. Emily took her first lesson on the spot. Mrs. Anderson called for a waltz, and, oddly enough, the red-haired pianist chose the very tune which had opened the Elks dance. To you, beautiful lady. Only now Emily didn't dance with a partner. She went through the steps alone, over and over, while Mrs. Anderson, in front of her, demonstrated as she called, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It was fun to move about the polished floor with no qualms about her lack of skill. I'll learn some of the new things, too, the Gabby Glide and the Turkey Trot, Emily thought. Thanksgiving was near now. Emily and Aunt Sophie were drawn together by their mutual eagerness. You and your grandfather are coming for Thanksgiving dinner, Aunt Sophie reminded. Oh, of course. But Annette gets in Wednesday night. Won't you come to the train with us? I certainly will. It was a cold night with wind racing down the station platform, but the parents and Emily waited with warming joy. At last came the whistle and the tolling bell and the great light of the engine. The homecoming students rushed to their waiting families, but all, even Don, paused to greet Emily. You look just like the Deep Valley High School, he said with his wide smile, shaking her hand. Annette threw her arms around her and kissed her. Emily smelled a delicious new perfume. Em, you old darling, I hope you're coming home with us. I'm coming tomorrow for Thanksgiving dinner. Grandpa and I are. I want you with me every minute. I want you to just follow me around. Hear? She's going to be too busy following me, said Nell, hugging her. No, no, me, cried Gladys. I'll follow you all everywhere, said Emily happily. It was like a breath of heaven. For 3 days she really lived. She and her grandfather went to the Thanksgiving dinner, but even Minnie's turkey was nothing compared to the joy of sitting in Annette's room after dinner, hearing her tell all about the university. She showed Emily her Epsilon Iota pledge pin. The girls are adorable, just adorable. She told her all about the rushing parties and pledge day. When Gladys came in, Annette turned the talk away from sororities, for Gladys had not been asked to join one, and it had been hard on her, Annette had confided to Emily. They talked about fraternity dances and college football games, which were very different from high school football games, held in great arenas. Jim Baxter was going out for football. He had made the second team. They told her about the oak tree where everyone went for sundaes and coffee. It's the Hineses of the university, Annette explained. They described the crush in the post office when you went before chapel to look for notes, or blue slips, or invitations, or corsages, Gladys put in mischievously. Don really did put one there for me when I pledged, Lynette explained. They talked about fussing and dates and river banking. That meant walking with a man along the path which followed the Mississippi. When indignant parents called them downstairs, they went to the piano and sang a song about river banking. When we go strolling, river banking, wandering along, strolling through the dusky shadows, all the world's a song. Don and Skid and Jim came in. Don was very collegiate, more so than any of them, Emily thought. The padded shoulders of a new striped suit made him look even bigger than he was, and he kept his coat open to show the pledge pin on his vest. He was in a very good mood, flashing his shiny smile and laughing uproariously at all of Skid's jokes. But he paid a minimum of attention to Emily. Skid noticed that her hair was up. The girls had noticed it earlier, saying that they liked it that way. They said so again, and Don turned and looked at her indifferently, but he didn't speak. She had thought she would tell them about the Browning Club, but that was impossible. It seemed impossible that they had ever been friends. Gladys played Minnesota Hail to Thee and Ski-U-Mah. They were all singing, their arms around each other's shoulders. Emily was singing with them, but she felt uncomfortable. She did not have the same sense of belonging she had felt at the Elks dance. Even though there was an extra boy, she decided to leave, and when she suggested that she take her grandfather home, no one protested. Jim Baxter even looked relieved, she thought. Uncle Chester drove them in the auto. All day Saturday and Sunday she stayed with the girls, drinking in their words. She didn't tell them, as she had intended to, about the party with Cab. It didn't seem as important as it had. Maybe Gladys would call him a graybeard. She didn't mention her several projects either. She felt sensitive about the dancing lessons, and she knew that Miss Cobb and a Browning Club would only sound dull. But on Sunday night, when the train carried them away, Emily was glad for her program of self-improvement. She wouldn't, she resolved, let herself be downed another time. I've learned, at least, to muster my wits in my own defense, she thought, and telephoned Alice.